Welcome everyone to the penultimate CASA seminar. It's currently scheduled CASA seminar. So it's my real pleasure to welcome Blair to CASA. Blair has a long history with geodata and spatial analysis. And I think his path to being tonight's speaker actually kind of speaks to a wider evolution of the industry. So before founding Geolytix in 2011, Blair was global head of analytic data at MapInfo. Some of you may know that of MapInfo as a kind of desktop GIS that's a competitor to ARC, but is one that's much more heavily used in industry. And in his role at MapInfo, Blair has, amongst other things, built gravity models for retailers, which all of you MSc students should now be familiar with, to help them plan for kind of expansion. However, and this is also something that students thinking about data for their dissertations should certainly take note of. As CEO of Geolytix, he's also undertaken to make much more of the spatial data that would once have been private and chargeable, open and free. And so there's a whole section of the Geolytix website that covers that. Regardless of the licensing terms, Geolytix is something of a data integrator, so pulling in data from open and closed data sets to create new data, new forms of data that can power decision-making by large firms with multiple locations, channels, and formats. And when you think about the fact that the single largest and most important decision kind of financially and strategically for many of these companies is land, then you can see why Geolytix is going from strength to strength. So with that in mind, let's hear more about who Blair is looking for in their next hire. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you, John. And thank you for that introduction, which did a far better job than I would have been able to do. So I'm Blair. I'm co-founder and CEO of Geolytix. Now I do have a few slides. There's very little content in them, which is always good. So hopefully you don't get distracted by the slides and you can either zone out and watch something on Netflix on your second screen and sort of see if I say anything vaguely interesting, you can flip back on. So I've probably got enough, well, I can talk forever about spatial data and data science, but I've probably got enough direct content for about 25 minutes, half an hour. And then because there is however many people there are on this, for the Q&A, I think the chat box is the best option. Now, just type them as we're going along. I don't even know if I can see the chat box when I'm presenting, but if I can't, we'll certainly get back to them at the end. So now, how do I start sharing? Share screen. Screen. So hopefully I am now sharing my screen. Yep. Cool. First thing I want to do is my daily obsession of the last couple of weeks as coronavirus has cleared from London is to go on at 4 o'clock every day and check the London MSOA level corona map. And the white ones, the white MSOAs are data suppressed. And I have been waiting weeks to be able to do a blockbuster run from north to south. And the path finally cleared 2 days ago. So you can now walk clean across London, north to south, if you follow my little map, without ever going in an MSOA that has got cases of COVID. So I find that reassuring, hopefully a harbinger of better times ahead. So I'm now going to put this into presentation mode. And I will talk through some of the slides and hopefully you'll get some value. And if you have any thoughts, questions, pop them in the chat box. So the very, very best jobs, the most interesting jobs in my experience are jobs that you can describe very, very simply to non-experts. So if someone asks me over a beer or in a restaurant, or I met them at a party and they say, well, what do you do? And it is really, really very simple. We tell people where to go. We tell people where to open shops. We tell people where to close shops. We tell people where to have ATMs, where to have banks, where to put delivery hubs, where to have Amazon collection boxes, anything where you're having to put something, is we tell you where to go. And as John already said, in any commercial business that involves distribution, which is pretty much 80 or 90% of commerce, the single most unforgiving decision that you make is real estate. And it is unforgiving because it cannot be changed. If you get your pricing wrong, you can change your price. If you get your branding wrong, you can change your brand up. If you want to change promotions, you can do that. You can buy a rival, whatever it is. Real estate cannot be moved. And the longevity of the decision is huge. So, I mean, leases, if you go leasehold, leases are getting shorter. Leases used to be 25 years with 5-year rent reviews upward. You go even further back, they're even longer. And then obviously supermarkets who will generally do freehold, you're buying a piece of land for tens, potentially hundreds of millions. So the largest supermarket developments will cost over £100 million if it's in a big city centre site. Now, in order to tell people where to go, I'm sure you all know this, we use a mixture of data, models, software, human skills, and the very it's a very old analogy, but I still like it, which is the system in order to select shops or to select locations is like driving a car, and the data is the petrol, the model is the engine, the car itself is the software within which you house the models and the data, and then the operator is the driver, the human who's making judgments. So it's a nice way of thinking about the problem of data, models, software, and people. So that is Leo, in case anyone was wondering. He is the 4th Geolytix baby we've had in 9 years. He's a genuine lockdown baby. Although those of you doing demography will know that we're headed for a very serious baby bust. Month of January, as the reports begin to roll in, it looks like birth rates in the Western world are down between 10 and 20%. And we really didn't need a baby bust. So one of the strange things of the virus actually is that it will almost certainly lead to more loss of life by babies not born than it will to people dying, because a baby not being born is a full life. Someone dying, they lose maybe 10 years of life. So it's almost certain that more human life years will be lost as a result of the fertility. But anyway, I digress. So who are we? Any business is it's people all the way down. Even a tech company, someone's writing the code. Even if you're using other people's libraries, someone has maintained that library. Someone has written the original piece of work. So everything is made by people ultimately. And our team is in line with, as I described, data model software operators. We split roughly the same way. So we have about 6 or 7 data engineers. We have about 10 or 12 data scientists, modelers. We have 7 or 8 software developers who write the software that we substantiate all of this stuff in. And then we have about 6 or 7 associates who are the people who understand the business questions. They've all worked for retailers and they help deliver the projects and guide what we're doing. In terms of our backgrounds, pretty much, I think I'm quite rare in that I've only got 1 degree. I think Agata's got 3 or something. Neil's got 3 or 4. Sometimes think I should be allowed to borrow a degree from someone as a CEO. So a mix of physics, maths, physical sciences, geography, GIS. So there's 3 CASA alumni in there who've done the master's course. And there's also probably about another 6 or 7 people who've done masters in various types of spatial analytics. And then an awful lot of geographers as well. So I think there's about 8 people went to Leeds. And yeah, a lot of ex-retailers in there. So I think 7 people used to be at Tesco, 5 used to be at Sainsbury's, and then we've got 4 each from a couple of our competitors. And we also have some raw graduates. So we do recruit people straight out of masters or straight out of bachelors, actually, for some people. So Chris, you might see down there, he came straight off the master's course. Josh and Clive came straight out of university, and Becca down bottom left is the first person we've taken who is actually doing an apprenticeship with us. So she joined at age 18, had fantastic A levels, could have gone to university, but has chosen to do an apprenticeship with us. And that team will be growing, which is part of why I'm here. So Lizzie will become person number 35 on Monday. Got another couple of job offers out, and then we will probably be looking to recruit again in the autumn. I've kind of, I don't know what other people are doing, but the last round of recruits, we didn't take people straight out of uni because we just thought it was good. It would be incredibly hard to do that, the full onboarding and training and support for someone in a first job. So we skipped graduates this year, but we'll be back next year. So these are the people, these are the sorts of people we do it for. A lot of those names are pretty recognizable, and that's for a couple of clear reasons. One, these large companies are making lots of very expensive decisions. So spending money on getting those decisions right makes a huge amount of economic sense. If your capital outlay if your capital budget is in the billions, tens of billions maybe, your store count is in the tens, hundreds of thousands, you're making a lot of decisions and a lot of very big decisions. So you'll come to people like us to help. You'll also notice that quite a few of them are non-UK, which I'll talk about in a second. And quite a lot of them, we work across multiple countries for them. So for Lego, who've had an absolutely fantastic 12 months of, you might have seen the results. People are definitely getting into Lego in lockdown, and they have a very ambitious store expansion program. Even in a digital first world, they see the huge value of stores, including, I think they're planning to open about 100 in China this year. Just pick out a couple. So Sainsbury's were our first customer. So Geolytix has been around 9 years. It was just me for a bit, and then Sainsbury's, I actually poached someone from Sainsbury's to come and join me, Sarah, who's really the co-founder, and Sainsbury's has been a customer ever since. So sometimes customers, we don't see them for a bit because they've got other things to do, but I don't think we've actively lost a customer in 8 or 9 years. And so Tesco, again, 7 ex-Tesco people now. So lots and lots of ex-client side experience, but also just straight technical people. So I mentioned we are a global business. So about half of our work is UK work. Head office is London. So of those 35 people you just saw, about 23, 24 are based in London, just in Clerkenwell. So not far from you guys at all. I guess a lot of you probably live around St. Luke's, Hackney Fields, etc. So you'll be able to walk to our office in Finsbury Business Centre. But we also do have people and offices in Tokyo, Melbourne, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Cape Town, and Warsaw and Leeds up in Yorkshire. So we've even been brave enough to open something in Yorkshire. And of the half our business that isn't UK, an awful lot of it is Asia Pacific. So we do quite a lot of work in Southeast Asia, China, East Asia, and also Australia, where we work for Coles, big supermarket there. So just talking a little bit about the state of the industry at the moment. In retail, as in any industry, every industry has been hugely disrupted, including education. John and I were just briefly chatting that a lot of the assumptions about what you need to do a particular thing, whether that's education or retail or financial transactions or transport or utilities, a lot of them have been shaken up. And one of them, the areas that has definitely been shaken up, and this is a product we produce using mobility data, so ping data of applications, which I'm sure is a topic that I know UCL are doing lots of research on and we are very involved in. So this is, we work with a couple of mobility data providers, and we take daily feeds of the ping data direct from the app aggregators, and we convert that into these weekly indices of footfall, amongst other things. And this is produced for about 2,500 shopping centres across the UK. And it allows retailers and asset owners to benchmark how things are changing in particular small areas. So how is Exmouth Market doing compared to Leather Lane, compared to Gray's Inn Road versus St Pancras? And then that can obviously get rolled up all sorts of different ways. So we can look at how retail parks are doing versus shopping centres. We can look at suburbs versus city centres. Transport hubs is an obvious one. Tourist areas, which did some really bizarre behaviour over summer. So over summer, some of the tourist areas were actually busier than normal, as everyone was staying at home and sneaking off to Cornwall for a bit of sunshine. And this is a product that's now used by several dozen customers here in the UK, including some public sector. So I think about 5 or 6 local authorities use this now. And obviously the huge question is going to be how this evolves. So this is an ongoing thing that as we come out of lockdown, we need this real-time intelligence. So that's one big thing that's happening in our industry. Another hot topic, and it's related to the digital first customer, is that it's a very old idea, but this idea of missions as opposed to shopping trips is getting more and more currency. So kind of in the good old days, you'd just worry about how much food people were buying, and then you'd figure out, okay, this group of people over here need £10,000 of groceries, and there's one supermarket here and one supermarket here, so they'll divide the spend up like this. But as things have got more fragmented and more complicated, the idea of missions has become very important to them. So it's the type of shopping you're doing, why you're shopping the way you are, and then that can get substituted in different ways. So the choice to buy a pizza to take away, or to have a pizza delivered, or to have an Indian ready-made meal, or to go to the fresh counter and have some produce made for you, or to scratch cook, is all about the mission for food for now, food for tonight. And this is some work we did in Australia. This is Melbourne. Hopefully we might have some Australians or people who know Melbourne. And what this is doing is it's trying to drill down into demand for food and actually say what sort of missions are dominating that demand for food. And that can then help us with our ranging and our channel choice, and whether we will go click and collect, or will we try and do this hyper fast 1 hour local delivery stuff that we're seeing, and we'll talk about later, or when the bars and restaurants are all closed, how much of that share of stomach diverts in based on missions. So this is just the red dots. It's saying it's traditional main trolley shop dominated. The green and blue dots, they're far more transient. They like to shop more often, so they're shopping every day in some cases, 3 or 4 times a week with small baskets. And then those small baskets might be dominated by fresh, which is, fruit, veg, fish, meat, or it might be dominated by grocery, which is ambient tinned stuff, pasta, pre-prepared, ambient being, well, you wouldn't even put chilled in that, so that's what you'd call grocery. And that will help them figure out their network plans going forward. So St Kilda, if any of you, again, if you know Melbourne, the fact that St Kilda is a heavily fresh, small basket dominated suburb is no surprise. By the beach, very bohemian. Kind of nearest equivalent would probably be, I don't know, Camden, or probably, yeah, no, it's pretty young. So I don't know, maybe Hackney, something like that would be St Kilda. Another big topic that everyone is now obviously worrying about and thinking about is this idea of digital first and online eating into traditional bricks and mortar, and the interaction between that, which is not straightforward. The chart on the right, that's real data. This is from a food retailer in the UK. And this is looking at population by 10-second intervals by drive time from a store, and this has got store-based fulfillment, this particular offer. I can't tell you who it is. So this is store-based fulfillment, so that's in-store picking. So you order online, but it actually gets picked in store. And this is looking at the in-store sales per person as you move further away from the store. And then also the online sales per person as you move further away from the store. So same catchment. I've deliberately picked a town where it is just a single store offer. So this is like for like, a little self-contained market. And the in-store sales per population is showing that lovely exponential decay that I'm sure you've been studying in your gravity models and trying to work out. I think Alan Wilson did the paper, didn't he, where he explained why it's an exponential or a double exponential curve. But then you also see the online sales per population decaying, which again is no surprise. People have known this for a very long time. But that's the way the online sales decay away from the store is not a simple single cause phenomenon. There are multiple things that will be driving that. So first and foremost, retailers tend to put stores where they have lots of people who like them. Therefore, it is natural that if the retail store is slap bang in the middle of an area that likes them, people are going to use the online offer more simply by nature of their demography. If you are a, inverted commas, Waitrose town, you're going to get more Waitrose online than if you are a town that Waitrose aren't popular in. And so you will see this inverted commas online halo. It's not a halo at all. It's an aspect of demography. The second one, and this is huge, particularly in food, but also in QSR and Deliveroo and Just Eat, is that slots are made available to you preferentially the closer you live to a store. So when you log on to any of these apps and you type your postcode in or you enter your loyalty card number, it knows where you live and it knows how much it's going to cost to serve you. It knows how many vans are going to be likely driving past you as you are available, and it knows your cost to serve. They really don't want to send a van 20 miles for one customer. So they simply won't make the slots available to you. They'll just, it's not that they don't have slots, they just don't want to serve you at a particular time. So that operational overlay is huge. And then you get things that that are normally thought of as online halo. So showrooming, where someone goes into a store, likes what they see and then purchases online. another side aspect of showrooming is brand familiarity. If you are a big fashion buyer, fitting and sizing is clearly important. And if you just get comfortable that Next or Reese or New Look or whoever it is, if you get comfortable with their sizing because you've used their stuff in store, you will then purchase more online. And then billboard effect. Shops are just adverts, they're just posters. I remember, I noticed Steve Halsall was on this call, so he'll probably remember this. Way back when Steve and I both worked for a company that opened cinemas, and we used to spend a fortune on pre-opening advertising, door drops, etc., just saying, cinema coming soon. And then after we opened a few cinemas, someone in the research department had the bright idea of asking people how they came to know a cinema was opening. And despite all our local advertising budget, it turns out that about 95, 96% of people knew the cinema was opening because they'd seen us build the damn thing. So just the physical presence is a huge billboard. And then in this one, you will also see a walk-in donut. So if you literally live on top of a store, like 200 meters away, rather than order online and get it delivered or collected, you will just get off your backside and go and buy it in the store. So you do get these tiny walk-in donuts, and you see it in pizza delivery. So pizza delivery in the UK now is it's about 70% delivery, about 20-25% collection, and then about 5% walk-in, which is just someone randomly walking past and buying a pizza. But that actual collection, it's largely price driven, and it's also, it's got to be walked, because quite often when you're buying pizza, you might be over the drink drive limit. So you do see these walk-in effects. So that's a big thing that's going on in the industry. And then I talk, and this is part of what we talked about before, delivery optimization is hugely important right now. The ability to deliver fast and cheaply is a critical competitive advantage for pretty much every retailer. So the big guys are just competing fiercely on smaller time slots and closer time slots to point of order. And so the latest thing, it started actually in China with HelloFresh, but is now, and then it came to Getter in the US, and Gorilla's top right, which is German, and Wheezy, which I think is American too, and then there's a whole plethora of them. These people are promising delivery in 15 minutes. So you go onto your laptop, you order your items, and they are delivered to your door within 15 minutes, which is just an absolute fierce logistical challenge, and takes huge amounts of money and logistics and location planning. They need spatial data scientists to do this. My favorite one, which hasn't made it to the UK yet, is in India. There is, I think it's called Tiffin Now or something, which is you can be in a traffic jam in Mumbai or New Delhi, and on an app, you can order a cup of tea, cup of chai, say whatever, and you're in a traffic jam. The app knows where you are, obviously, with all the location sensors. And then a guy on a bike who is also in the traffic jam will turn up and deliver you your tea or coffee that he has made in a little still on the back of his bike. So it's a lovely idea of the immediacy of delivery, that you're stuck in a traffic jam and you fancy a fresh, hot tea or coffee, and you can get one at a price. So that's a big thing that's going on. This is just an example. This is bike ride isochrones, which we've developed for someone. We actually use a whole load of APIs of other people to do this, and this is a real live example. This is one of our software deployments for one of these people who are doing the super fast promise, and they need to be able to get the stuff from the micro-fulfillment center to the customer. And they've decided on an 8-minute bike ride, and then they'll have what's called rack time, which is where the thing gets picked and placed in the order, and then the bike is available to take them straight away. So hyper-local. So we need our skills for this. Another, got to put some eye candy in, as you guys presumably like maps. So this is another example of some of the mobility data. So this is 24 hours in the life of Manchester City Centre. We actually take a full year, Monday to Friday, in order to get the spatial granularity and temporal granularity right. And then we can do stuff like this, which shows you where people are when through the day, which is clearly of importance to nighttime economy, coffee shop chains, transport planners, all sorts of people need to have that. And then a bit more eye candy maps, just showing you some of the things we're doing with mobility data. These are from Asia, these examples. So on the left, you can do catchments. So we can track the phone. We know the phone interacted within a hex of maybe 100, maybe 50 meters of a store. Or if the store is bigger, actually, we can be sure you are in that store. And then we know where that phone goes to sleep at night, most times. So you can actually derive store catchments without any customer data, purely off the mobility data. And then time of day analysis is another big piece of mobility data. So this is Seoul, yeah. So you've got Gangnam down bottom right, and this is activity between 12 and 1 for people who are not at home. So you strip out, you know where they live. So you say, okay, I'm not interested in pings from home. I want the away from home pings, and I can do that by time of day. So that's a lunchtime opportunity index. And then because these mobile phone ping data sets are global in nature, you also can identify the phones that are from out of country. There's a bit of like, there's some, you've got to be a little bit careful because of hot swapping SIMs and stuff. But this is out of country pings, and you know the country the pings come, the phone has come from or is registered to. And again, I think there might be KL or Seoul Airport, and we've picked out a particular country. So that's pings from country X in country Y, and again, see it through the time. So on to what you were kind of promised, which is a bit about what I think is happening in the industry and what that means for you people in your careers, and what I'm looking for as I look to grow the team. And again, it was interesting, John mentioned the word hybrid, and that's a word that we are seeing time and time again, not only in respect to working practices, but also in business models, data, and people. This idea of a mix and match future, which is definitely what is happening. Everyone's got to, you know, it's not that everyone just goes back to the way it was before. The new normal will be different somehow. And this idea of not slogging in through a commute to get to an office so you can sit at a desk and do what you've been doing perfectly adequately for the last year from home, that's just not going to wash. So we are going to see these hybrid working practices. And by that, I don't just mean working from home or working from an office. I think there's some going to be really interesting hybridizations of, you know, people are already doing deals with the big WeWork. So a big corporate will do a deal with a WeWork, which means you can work in any office. You fancy going and working from Leeds for a month, fine, you'll have an office. You think, you know what, Gibraltar sounds quite nice, I'll try that. And the world of work will have to figure out how to provide you a space. And even for solus workers, you know, some idea of social shared workspace. So even if you're working on your own, having other people to talk to. So again, the idea of business hubs, particularly in smaller rural towns, a lot of people are thinking of. So I think all of this is good, I think. So there's the working practices are hybrid. And then also, again, John talked about I think the days of thinking of open source and proprietary as completely opposites that always fight, I don't think that's true, and I don't think it's ever been true. But we have this sort of slightly strange situation now where Microsoft is a huge proponent of open source, where we have, slightly controversially, some of the biggest editors of OpenStreetMap being corporates like Uber, because Uber use OSM and Tesla use OSM for their off-road parking. There's a huge amount of Tesla commits into OpenStreetMap. So the idea of corporates embracing open and welcoming it and seeing the benefit of avoiding the tragedy of the commons, that if it's open and we're all looking after it, it's going to be better for everyone. I think we'll see a lot of that. And we do our own tiny little bit for that. So we do make some of our data open, and I hopefully will make some more of it open in the future. And then also as part of that, and this is sort of coming on to what I look for and what is highly valued, is this idea of hybrid people that sometimes also called, you might have come across it as T-shaped people. So you have people who know a little bit about an awful lot, and then a lot about a really little bit. So being an absolute world expert in a very small niche is always going to be super valuable. But we also do need the bar of the tea in these people. They have to be able to do a little bit of everything. And that gives us as a company flexibility. And it gives you, as you develop your careers, the ability to say, okay, this is my super niche specialism, but I really enjoy doing a bit of this. Oh, and turns out people really need these sorts of people. So I'll go and I'll develop another little pool of real expertise. So those are definitely the way people are going. So I'll just talk a little bit about people more generally and what I have found in our recruitment journey. Because all of these, every single person on this, I think I either interviewed, there might be one or two I didn't, pretty much. So this team was kind of built by us. And the first, again, it's a very old saying that I'm sure, well, if you haven't come across it before, lucky me, I get to be the one who shares it with you, that culture eats strategy for lunch. So a company's culture always trumps everything else. And if you can get the culture right, the strategy will naturally flow. If you get the strategy wrong, it really doesn't matter because you can change it. But the company culture, and culture is a very amorphous and tricky thing to figure out how it exists. But it's vital, and I have to, in the recruitment, think about the sort of company I want us to be. And some of that is the sort of people that I think will help us develop a good, strong culture. So we're big enough now that we get to have values as a company, but they're pretty simple. We're innovative, we're trusted, we're the best we can be, and it's people all the way down. And so kind of when you're thinking about where you guys want to go and work, or women, where you want to go and work, trying to understand that culture of the place you work in is probably your number one task, because it will determine whether you're happy there or not. So making sure you get the culture right is fundamental, and making sure you pick one that fits what you believe, because not everyone has the same set of things they want to do. So the other thing, like all companies now know that talent is the war. It's the hill they live or die on. If they get the war for talent right, pretty much everything else can look after itself. The saying about the single biggest, most unforgiving decision for a retailer is whether to open something because you can't change it. It's the same with talent or skills and people. You get that right, a lot of the other stuff just comes naturally. Thinking a little bit more about about choosing workplaces and workplaces choosing you. I sometimes have quite lively debates with some of my colleagues because I personally think a lot of what people talk about work-life balance, which is a very hot topic at the moment, and people are rightly concerned about work-life balance. But I sometimes think they misframe the question because it assumes a real binary split, that you have work and then you have life, and they're totally separate buckets. Some people like that, and that your work is here, it's in a bucket and it just exists, and then life is somehow separate to work. And that's quite a recent invention. The idea of work and life being totally separate is quite new. It's an industrialized thing. It didn't happen in olden days. And if you go and sort of read some of the anthropology texts on how work and play and life are constructed in pre-industrial societies, there simply wasn't a distinction between work, play, and life. It was all life. And I actually prefer that way of thinking because work is so important. You spend a huge amount of your life doing it. You will spend a huge amount of time with people, interacting with people, because work is inherently social. And so to somehow hive work off and say that's unimportant, it's just work, I think misses the potential for you to lead full, satisfying careers. That if you're doing things that you're going into because you enjoy it, because it's fun, because you're having fun, whatever it is that's empowering you, that it makes you feel good about yourself, then the idea of sort of this dreadful, work is an oppressive thing that sucks all of the life out of my life, live to work, don't work to live, all of these cliches. I think if you get in that mindset, you're setting yourself up for danger. But also sort of thinking about how we recruit and how you guys will experience the recruitment market. Generally, I have two modes when I'm recruiting. I'll either have a very specific mental image of the sort of person with the sort of skills I need for a particular job. And hopefully I'll try and have articulated that in a job spec or job description, but I'll have a very clear image of what I'm after. And usually quite early on in a discussion, interview, exercise mode, you'll figure out, the jigsaw puzzle that is this person fits beautifully into this little hole I have here. And so they'll get hired. And sometimes people who don't quite fit that hole, but they're still brilliant people, you regret them. You have to say, look, not for you. You might actually be better in many ways than this other person, but they just fit this hole. And then there's a more generic sort of thing where we've got multiple positions and we are looking for, inverted commas, good candidates. And we're being a bit more open and thinking about what we are after. And I'll talk a little bit about, actually, no, I'll do that afterwards. So those are the two modes I've got in recruitment. And we've done pretty well. So there's 34, 35 people in that. We've been going 9 years. 2 people have left the company in 9 years. So I don't know what our retention rate is. 2 divided by 35 upon 9. I should work it out properly. But it's very, very rare. And both of those left for good reasons. There are good reasons people can leave. And Kirst is an example where he was in Germany, and for him to grow in his career, he had to make a move. And it's great that he's here and listening to us. The idea that work is family, it's not really family, because I can't sack my daughter, or my son can't resign his position as son. And sometimes in the world of work, you do just have to part ways. So just thinking about this isn't like a checklist where I go, okay, this person has to do this, 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 and this. But it's just sort of the nature of people that seem to work in our company and seem to work, I've noticed, in many other companies. And probably number one, and it's hard to quantify this. There's many, many different ways you can do it, but some people are just smarter than others. You can measure it however you want, and IQ is an awful test. It doesn't really capture all sorts of different intelligence, but let's just call it a generalized intelligence, and that is the number one correlate with success in life, outside of the world of work, but certainly in work as well. People who are inherently curious are always going to be much better, in my experience. If you build a model and there's a very strange key driver in it, a good modeler wouldn't just accept it and go, oh, look, incidence of diabetes correlates with commuting to work by bicycle. Therefore, I'll use it in the model. There should be a curiosity as to why that is, and probe it and explore it and pull it apart and investigate it and query it. So that curiosity, in fact, my degree is physics, so I kind of always like the story of James Clerk Maxwell, who's Britain's, him and Newton, two greatest physicists we've ever had. And James Clerk Maxwell was actually quite badly bullied at school. But when his teachers recalled him in later life after he'd gone on to find things, and they said he had a phrase, because he spoke in a Scots dialect, that whenever he saw something, anything, pretty much, it could be a ball, a glass of water, a tumbler, something operating, he would say, "Wha's the go of that? Wha's the go of that?" Which is Scots, but how does that work? And I think that instinctive curiosity of how does that work, that's pretty much, you can't replace that. So that having that natural curiosity. The next one is a trade-off, because you want conscientious people who, eye for detail, get things done, and you also want creative people. And sometimes conscientiousness and creativity are hard to get in the same person. So sometimes you just have to accept that I'm a super creative person who can solve things that I can't. Maybe they're not the best timekeeper, and maybe sometimes they'll forget to do things. So getting the blend there of conscientiousness and creativity. And an interesting little aside on that, and I only read about this last week, but using curse words is actually the highest correlate of not being conscientious, but is the highest correlate of being creative. And thinking about colleagues I know, that does actually add up. The ones who swear a lot are a bit more creative, but they're maybe not quite the most conscientious. And also loyalty. The fact that Kirst is one of only two people to have left, it saves us a huge amount of time and money and effort. Constantly having to hire to replace is hard. So there's kind of a double-edged sword, because we do use an outfit called Red Tiger, who are a recruitment consultancy firm. And if you guys want to get in touch with Steve Halsell, they are very good. So I kind of quite like nicking people from other companies, but Steve's definitely not allowed to come and nick any of my people. So loyalty is definitely something. And then there's just a couple of I'm not going to do a careers, how to do an interview seminar or anything like that. But just there are certain things that are just red flags. They're just, if people interact certain ways, that they're probably not going to work out. And so I'm sure if any of you, I'm sure you'll do interview training where you'll get warned off what some of those are. But yeah, showing showing us sort of the courtesy of being interested in us as a company and things like that, and not spending the interview blaming lots of other people and saying why things might not have gone the way you'd hoped because of the fault of other people. Don't think I want to hear that. So the last slide is just a couple of thoughts on the year coming up, which are all good for us as spatial data scientists. It's why we're busier. We're busier now as we come out of pandemic. Took a bit of a knock at the beginning, but we're busier now because the pandemic has created a whole lot of problems and a whole lot of challenges, including stranded assets, which by some estimations, about 30 to 40% of shopping centre space is now redundant. And that space is very, very expensive real estate. What are we going to do with it? That's a multi-trillion pound question. The emergence of digital first. So everyone has just got used to doing things digitally, even to the extent that I saw someone in a pizza, in the car park of a pizza delivery company, in the car park outside the store, was actually ordering their pizza on the app. And I'm like, you're sat in a car outside the store. You just have to walk into the store and tell them what pizza you want, and they'll make it for you. But they're so now it's ingrained that it's digital first. You do it on the app, and then you sit in your car until they tell you you can go and get your pizza. So how that is going to play out. Stuff around the pandemic. So everyone is now talking about data-led decision making, which is fantastic. We have been sometimes poorly served by our leaders, our political betters, in that they've paid lip service to data-led decision making, but they don't really do it very much. And I think part of it's cultural. So I was reading that of the current cabinet of 40 odd people, only one of them has a STEM degree. So you've got 39 people from humanities and social, maybe a couple of social scientists, and then one person with a genuine data analytical background. But I think everyone does now say data-led decisions, which is great for our industry. And then the last one, because it's coming up this weekend, so hopefully you'll all fill in your census, not break the law. But census year is always another great year for innovations and new findings, because even in a world of mobility data and financial data and all these other alternative data sources, the good old census is still vital. So again, that's going to be a big part of what we're doing this year. It's one of the reasons we're going to be recruiting. So for us as people in the spatial data world and spatial data scientists, I think 2021 and 22 are going to be really good, fun, busy years. And that's me. How long did I take? Did I overrun? I stopped sharing.
Considering that you thought you had 25 minutes worth of material, possibly a bit, but I think it's been really helpful kind of giving both the perspective on the industry as a whole and then kind of bringing it back to
crikey, I did go on
skills. So I'm going to exercise chair's privilege and just say that having sat in traffic in India, I'm pretty excited to hear that I can now get tea on the go. And I'm also glad to hear that I'm creative, but bloody annoyed that I'm not considered conscientious. So I'm going to lead with a couple of questions just while we see what kind of comes into the chat window. And I guess the first thing is I know that we have still a significant number of students who come to CASA without, programming backgrounds, who obviously then are picking up a lot of, Python, R, things like that, but probably don't think of themselves as necessarily, hardcore programmers. I have my own ideas about this, but I'd like to hear what do you think the opportunities are for people who are not themselves, or at least don't consider themselves to be technical, but who are knowledgeable about code and data, maybe coming from kind of a more traditional.
Yeah. No, they're in a great position, right? Those people are super important, because you're right. My take on programmers is that genuine core programmers are born. I don't think you can train them. I think they just have a way of thinking about the world. They're kind of like poets. They're sort of slightly orthogonal, but there's not very many of them, and you actually don't need very many of them. You could, you'd be genuinely surprised at how small the core programming teams are in some pretty big applications. You don't need a lot of really good programmers, but having lots of people who are competent, who can look at a Python script and maybe hack it around and get it to do what they want, or SQL's never going away. Being able to use SQL and write a little package that gets what you need done is always going to be important. And I would recommend everyone, even if you don't think you're going to be a programmer, I would still suggest you learn the basics of Python, R, and SQL. I think those are the big three in our world. Even so that, when you talk about it with the real programmers, they'll at least not think you're an idiot. And you'll be a step ahead of all the other people who are still monkeying around in bloody Excel or something.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, my sort of related question then would be, and this will be my last one before I can see they're starting to come into the chat window now, is so in terms of the kind of, if you will, the key words that you think would make you or a recruiter, and I see Stephen is made through in a comment as well, would make you or a recruiter kind of sit up and pay attention, or which you think will make you or a recruiter sit up and pay attention over the next few years in terms of like key ideas, key words, key skills?
So there's a couple of things that are never going to be invaluable to me, but they're quite specific, which I go back to when I'm recruiting. I either have that person, and I kind of know the job they're doing now, and that's always going to be really important. In fact, when I wrote the very first business plan for Geolytix, I actually wrote the names of the first 12 employees down, and about 9 of them are employees, because I just knew they were going to be the people who fitted. If I'm as we've moved from that to recruiting cold, because the best way of recruiting, right, is always going to be people you know, or people you know of who have a industry. And I don't mean reputation in the sense of, oh, he's a big guru, but they are well spoken of by people who have interacted with them. That's always, the whole thing about being praised, being praised by others, not having to praise yourself, is very true. And again, back to the developer one, there are certain people who I know are really good because they're in the community and they contribute to open source projects, and you can see what they do and they're really interested in it. More generally, I think having people who have done things is always going to be interesting. And it doesn't even have to be what, directly in it, but if you have, you've got a really interesting hinterland and you've done interesting and challenging things. I don't just mean, go and join a load of societies because it looks good on your CV. If you've got real passion's always interesting. Passion always interests me. If you're really enthusiastic and passionate about something and you show how that's done, that's always gonna make me interested.
So how would do you have any suggestions then for how students could build a kind of a professional network in a virtual world, since they can't kind of corner you at the bar tonight?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? It's interesting actually, because, and again, the other thing about passionate and enthusiastic, we literally we were having this debate yesterday about internships and whether we should do internships at all, because there's arguments that it's discriminatory, blah 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 blah. And then we say, well, if we went out and we engaged and we actively went out and looked for people to do internships, but there's then a counter argument. which I actually do get, and I think this is the answer to your question, is just reach out, just talk to people. You know, I know you might have social anxiety and you might be a bit shy or a bit embarrassed, but one of the great things about virtual is, you know, what's to lose? Like drop them a note, drop her a note, say, I was really interested in stuff you were doing. Here's something I've done. Would you be interested in having a look at it?
Yeah. Yeah. And follow up is the other thing I would say to all my students. So I can see, so I know Ben had a question. I'll come back to that in a second, but I can see Philip's right now, which is a more technical one. To what extent do you still use traditional gravity models, and how have you changed and adapted this to the kind of changing consumer space, and how do you go about calibrating them?
Yeah. So yeah, we still do use gravity models for certain markets, and it's always been the case that gravity models work well in some situations and not well in others. So I'm sure in your course you've been told all of this. Where you have gravity models work best where you have single purpose trips, where the trips are all home, shop, home. So you want nice simple trips. You want similarity of mode. So if everyone drives or if everyone walks, that's good. Mixed mode is hard. And you want clearly defined competitor sets. So something like opticians. You can only get glasses from a registered optician.
Yep.
So you've got a very constrained set of supply points. That would say gravity modeling might work. Whereas very diffuse, where you're trying to do like takeaway food, well, you're going to struggle to gravity model that, whatever happened. So we still do use gravity models in grocery in particular, particularly main shop grocery. We will still use gravity models. And to the calibration question, I think it was, oh God, who was the guy at Leeds University who, Steve Hulsell will remember him, Stan Openshaw. I think his famous thing about trying to calibrate a gravity model without vast amounts of customer data is utterly futile. You can't do it. You need lots of customer data, and now whether that's loyalty card data, or increasingly what companies can do now is linked POS data. So if you use your credit card online at a supermarket, they capture that card. If that same card then gets used in store, they can link it together so they can get the address. So you can get customer data that way, or mobility data. I showed an example of a fast food store using mobility data to create catchments and customer data. But you can't do gravity modeling without lots of customer data.
Yeah. So Ben had a question about kind of languages. She said she'd heard that Geolytix use Alteryx, but then you've mentioned Python and R. So is it
just say in terms of tech stack, we pretty much use everything, and we use anything. So for a start, amongst the 35 people, if you want to use a particular tool, as long as it doesn't cost like 50 grand or something, you can use it if it works for you. So we don't mandate a tech stack. Alteryx, I think a couple of the guys, I think we've deployed a couple of tools into Alteryx, but obviously Alteryx isn't a language, right? It's an application, it's a program, and underneath it's actually, well, it's probably written in C or C++, but you can use Python and R. You can bind them in, can't you, into Alteryx?
Because my main question is how the Geolytix, how do you handle the big spatial data side?
Sorry, how do we handle?
Some spatial data set you hold is quite big. So I'm wondering how did you handle this big data set when you do the project? And I just heard some people told me that you use the Alteryx. I'm not sure what else software did you also use.
Okay.
But interesting to know what exactly they are, if possible.
Yeah. So for our internal stuff and our model development, we don't use Alteryx. It kind of depends on, each person has their tool of choice. And a lot of the tool of choice, again, little interesting research, most people actually use the tool of choice they first learned. So the language you learn when you're beginning your craft tends to stay with you. It's what you default back to. So I can still write in Map Basic for all of my geospatial manipulations, not because it's the best language, but because it's the one I learned when I was 22. What I would say universally is pretty much everyone has pretty much got to have strong SQL skills, because the data is going to live in Postgres, PostGIS as a default. And then for some customers, it'll be Oracle or MS SQL Server. But there's going to be a database in pretty much everything. So being comfortable around SQL is pretty much you're going to have to be. And then the language most of the guys use R, and they're also using some for the big data stuff. They're using like Scala and some of the Google BigQuery stuff. For the mobility data, which is trillions of points, it's all done in stuff I don't understand.
Really interesting question here from Samuel. So changing, this is the great thing about the chat is that the questions can swing quite dramatically. So in academia, we're frequently allowed to give up on or fail projects, which obviously is not something we like to do, but is useful when something is clearly just not going where you want, or you're kind of inundated with more exciting things. What steps does Geolytix take when it seems like things aren't working out with the client?
Yeah, good question. So, so first of all, I'd just say that failure isn't it's not rejected. We're allowed to fail in the commercial world too, and we're allowed to say, look, it just didn't work, because sometimes, especially if you're trying to do hard things, sometimes it's just not going to work, and you just have to accept that. So the key thing when anything like that's happening and there's a paying customer in the loop, and it's back to one of the four, I'm not expecting you to remember our four values, but trust. So the customer, you have to have built up a level of trust with the customer that you can go to them and say, I thought I was going to be able to build you a really good model using this. Turns out I can't. I'm sorry. Can we figure something out? And if you have built up enough goodwill with them, they will pretty much always say, yeah, okay. You know, if you're telling me it literally can't be, the problem is insoluble the way you suggested it might be. As long as you're open and honest with them, and you can come up with an alternative way of doing it, you'll be okay. So well, I'll just take it, not just Geolytix. So I've been doing this in a commercial sense for 26 years. So I've done thousands and thousands of different projects. And I've only ever had two that got nasty, where there was pointing fingers and, oh, you told me you could do this, and you told me you could do that. And out of thousands, I've had two. And that's, I like, hopefully, because of the organizations I've worked in, have all bought into the building up trust with the customer. I have seen Death March projects, which is a project from hell that just carries on and sucks money, and everyone knows it's going to fail. And the interesting thing about Death March projects is most people know they're on a Death March project very early on, and they just haven't got the courage to put their hand up and say, this isn't working. And everyone just it builds up its own momentum. I think it probably also helps that most of the companies and teams I've worked with are quite small. I think my observation of Death March projects is they tend to happen in larger companies. There's something about the hierarchy and the momentum that can build up behind an effort that is clearly failing. And if you ever are on a Death March project, make sure you tell someone and you say, this isn't working. Because the worst thing is just to plow on and go, oh, it'll get better, because it won't.
Yeah, that's definitely something I saw in consultancy as well. Alexei has a question kind of following on, and maybe bringing a bit of the tech in here as well. Do you ever implement, or have you considered implementing ABMs as part of your
Yeah, interesting. And one of our recent recruits, actually, I think Kate, for her masters, did an ABM. Like I'm not super close to ABMs, and because because I'm 53 and I don't do as much modeling as I used to, I'm probably not as close to it as I was. I remember ABMs being talked about as a really, really good idea that was going to solve lots of problems 10 years ago. And then it kind of didn't happen. And I kind of wondered why. I kind of looked at it, I wonder what's happened there. But maybe the time has come, because I know another thing that in the wider modeling world, we talk about a lot, and amongst the modeling group at Geolytix, is at the moment an awful lot of spatial models are aggregate models. We take groups of people and we say there's 100 people here. Where does the money go? That's how a gravity model works, right? It's an allocation model, or a scorecard is an aggregation of human behaviors. And with the much data richer world we now occupy, there is a lot of thought about moving to actually modeling the individual. And then, so rather than modeling the aggregate, we model the individual and then aggregate up the results, which ABM might be. I presume by ABM you mean agent-based modeling. I hope I've got the right acronym.
Sorry about that. Yes, I did mean agent-based models. Yeah.
So I think that's interesting, and we actually spoke really, and you kind of have to go down that individual route if you're going to try and model some of the complexity. So we were talking to a coffee customer who retails coffee. So if they think of the coffee universe being everything from jars of coffee to coffee made in the workplace to vended coffee out of a machine to high-end vended coffee out of a specialist machine to barista served coffee. So that's the total coffee universe. And they have a play in all of it. So ready to drink coffee, coffee in a can, coffee in a machine, coffee in a store, blah, 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 blah. And they're talking about trying to model the whole complexities of people's relationships with coffee and how that plays into a retail strategy. And I think you kind of have to go down an individual level model at that point. I don't see how the sort of traditional constructs of location planning would help them answer those questions.
By way of like a closing reflection, I was really pleased to hear Blair kind of highlight the importance of kind of culture and curiosity and trust as part of the working environment, especially for kind of master's students who are coming out possibly with limited experience of the work world. And I think it's easy for people looking for that first job to kind of focus on things like prestige and salary, but you're going to spend a lot more time with your colleagues than almost anyone else except your life partner. So it actually pays to think about the environment that you're working in. And for instance, that's one of the things that has brought me back to CASA after all this time.